Communitech helps founders start, grow, and succeed. Our members raise 19% more capital, raise more rounds, hold more patents, and have an increased financial velocity. Communitech member companies scale faster than anywhere else in Canada. So if you're not a Communitech member yet, let's fix that. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining today's Ask Me Anything session, the playbook for successful storytelling in the US market. I am Erin Warner, membership specialist at Communitech. Before we get started, I have a few reminders for today's event. So this session is being recorded, so it can be shared as a resource for our founders to reference later. You can find all of our past AMA recordings at communitech.ca. We have a great speaker for today. Please note if you're interested in following up after the session just to discuss this topic further, we'll be sending out Riva's speaker information following in an email. And you can always connect with your Communitech FSM as well. Please check out our newsletters for a list of upcoming AMA sessions. Also keep in mind that if you do have a specific comms challenge that you're currently working through at your company, Riva is happy to take that as a case example for the group and kind of work through it as a group. So just keep that in mind as we go through today's session. So with that, I will introduce today's speaker. So we have Riva Seth with us. She's a senior advisor at Shift Communications as part of the agency's global expansion offering. Here she helps high-growth companies entering the U.S. market lay the groundwork for growth and capital market success. She has 15-plus years experience in strategic communications and has rich background as an entrepreneur, lawyer, political advisor, and communications consultant. She was a co-founder of a successful cannabis media company and most recently built and led the communications team for Lambda School, now BloomTech. Riva is the author of 2 best-selling nonfiction books, and her ideas have been published in Fast Company, The Atlantic, Rotman's Management Magazine, The Huffington Post, and The Globe and Mail, among other platforms. So with that, we will stop presenting our screen and we'll invite Riva up to the stage.
Thank you very much, Erin. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you to everybody for joining. I'll just build out a couple more points on that intro, just so you have a sense of the perspective I'm bringing and how I might be able to help. And just to reiterate, if you do have a case study question, I've done sessions like this before, and it's really great to have the group being able to learn from what other companies are seeing and experiencing. So yeah, think of any challenges you might want to share, and hopefully we have a good 20 minutes at the end to have a larger group discussion. We want to just jump to the next slide. Super. Just to touch on a little more on my background, I really do bring a very mixed perspective to the communications story. I've worked in Canada, the UK, grew up very globally. I really focus the different perspectives I bring from the political communications, the journalism, and the communication side is very much on how do you tell a story that lets you play above where you are a bit. So what's happening in the market? What can we do to take your brand story and really elevate where it is so you can just unlock that next level of growth? And that's really what I focus on at Shift Communications is global brands coming in primarily to the Valley that are looking to grow, list, or fundraise and just need some help in terms of how to get a story that's going to break out in a very crowded and competitive market. If we want to jump to the next slide, this playbook is actually really neat because it came about very organically. Over the past 2 years, we were just seeing, as you know, waves of companies coming into the market, and they were coming to us, and we were seeing them primarily from Canada, the EU, Israel, and India. And there was a set of commonalities in that if these companies had just made a few nudge changes, we could have done even more for them. And so this started off internally as a memo that we were sending out as we were onboarding new clients coming in. And then from there realized this is something scalable that we can template and just help people understand a little bit more coming in at the front end so they can just exponentially unlock when they do come to the US, how that story and that brand mission lands in the market. If we want to go to the next one, how we built this is kind of neat. So it came about organically that we saw this need. And then I actually went around, and we're part of a global agency. So I went to our experts in each of these areas for their perspective on what these brands could do. But what we did that was really exciting is that we did a whole series of anonymous VC interviews where we said, tell us off the record, what have you seen that you wish your portfolio companies had known about their communications, their content, their community strategy? And what have you seen? We won't reference, obviously, the brands or names, but tell us those insights. And we were lucky to get Gray Capital, GGV Ventures, Mayfield, among the different funds that spoke to us off record. And then we also went to the accelerators. So from Chris Albinson at Communitech to Thai, Indiaspora, C100, as well as some of the consulates that are out here working to drive their stories, and ask them the same series of questions. Off the record, what are the challenges that you see? What are the opportunities that you think are there that are being missed if there were a series of nudge changes that these companies were to make just to help them land better in this marketplace? And so this output comes from about a good 4 months of research that we did alongside our own observations. So we want to move to the next one. Just before we get into it, it's always worth a reminder that the US market really it remains the market of boundless opportunity. I'm sure everyone here knows VC capital reached new records. It's the highest return and most opportunity dense marketplace in the world. And it remains the place where if you can really break through, your story can accelerate and unlock all kinds of global opportunities. And so with that boundless opportunity, if we just look at the next slide, it's a good reminder that it's also a super competitive and crowded marketplace. Seth Godin always nails it with, in this busy marketplace, if you're not standing out, it's like you're not there. And so just, on why it's so important, this is both probably one of the most crowded, competitive, and sophisticated marketing and PR marketplaces. And so really just reflecting on that as you look to come and launch your story is always a good reminder. We want to move to the next one. So what is PR before we go any further? PR traditionally, when we think about it, we think about its media coverage. And that's increasingly just a really outdated and kind of self-harming for your business way to think about it. The way to really think about an effective PR strategy is that this is the function that runs the consistent conversations with all of the groups and stakeholders you need to hit that next level in your business and your growth plan. And so media is a channel and it's a component, but equally important are, how are you running your community conversations, the investor conversations? How are you helping them set up for the conversations that happen when you're not in the room? The validators that you have, whether they're analysts or influencers or adjacent business leaders. And so increasingly, excuse me, against, a fragmented marketplace, the rise of communities in terms of how business and brands unlock, it's really important for founders and their teams to take that more holistic 360 perspective, where a piece in TechCrunch is great, but that's not how to think about your function. This is about running ongoing conversations and making sure those conversations are landing and messaging what you need for the moment. If we want to move to the next one, why does it matter? And so PR really, it really comes down to the story you tell becomes your business reality in many ways, because this is where you get your brand buzz. This will impact how you're able to hire or not hire. It will open the doors for the investor conversations, the partner conversations. And so it really becomes the accelerator and force underneath your product and your team is really the story that everybody's telling about it and how that story is landing. And so what our goal in this session is to really give you 5 of the most pertinent frameworks that we've seen in terms of how to think about how to do this so your story can really be that accelerator that you're hoping for. Do we want to move to the next one, please? Thanks. So we can jump past yeah. So the first one key step that we really found is appreciate the difference. And this is one of those funny ones, especially for Canadians, where there is a bit of a false familiarity to the US. And if we want to just move to the next slide, one of the most interesting things that we heard in our VC conversations was that, and this comes from, in part, like the US dominates in popular culture and media. And there's a sense globally that people feel like they understand the US market better than they do. And so this insight surfaced again and again that teams just failing to appreciate the difference because they've been here, they know it, is actually what ends up having them under leverage how they perform. And so just a great reminder that as you think about coming into the US, break it down by regions, by communities, by ecosystems, and just not to have the hubris that can sometimes happen in Canada. And as a Canadian, I know, like, moving out here 5 years ago, it is very different. And some of the most high impact work that we've done in terms of results has been even sitting with founders and saying, the story that you told in Toronto, little tweaks and adjustments in terms of how you tell it in New York, and then little tweaks and adjustments on how you tell it in Palo Alto really help how you connect and how your story lands. And so I think if you take nothing else from this, but you just take away the reminder that before you come into the US, step back and just see how you might want to adjust your story so it lands a bit better for your group. And just a quick, really new tactic that I got some great feedback on was I was working with a founder who was about to go for a pitch, and we had him listen to a whole bunch of podcasts and past audio materials that one of the partners that was going to be there had done, and then just iteratively adjust his story a little bit so he patterned back the way the partner spoke. And these are the kind of little things to build into your runway in terms of adjusting your story for the marketplace that just can have a really profound impact in terms of how the room responds, how the journalist responds, or how the analyst takes your story. So we want to move to the next one. The other really interesting piece of insight that we discovered in this research is that the country's changed. Everyone's changed coming out of COVID, but the US especially, it's been 2 years for a lot of people that they've been able to come to the US and do the rounds and have those events and conversations. And so even if you felt like this was a market and community you knew really well before, it is worth highlighting that the social protests, the elections, it's been all of that has really changed the ecosystem, it's changed the place, and just to take that into account. If we want to move to the next one, thank you. So the solution on this is really just invest the time, be intentional. The awareness of realizing that the story might need to be adjusted for the US is significant. And then engage and consult people in your target market and take the time to message and focus group with them. And as you're looking to do your rollout, take it region by region or ecosystem by ecosystem. So build it out that you do have a chance to, if you're going to the East Coast, that's one phase, and then look to do what you're doing on the West Coast. And that will let you really adjust the story for the local and regional cultural differences, which are really significant. If we want to move to the next one, step 2 really dovetails on that, which is understand your American audiences. If we want to move into that one. And again, this is on investing the time and effort to really figure out what they value, how this has shifted and changed. What are the current challenges and trends that are happening in their local market and landscape that might impact what your offer is, how your product can help. Again, this is about really stepping back and not just carrying over what's worked in Canada or in your regional market, but saying what's different about the people here, what's different about what they're looking for, what their challenges are, and how can we adapt our story to reflect their priorities. And really taking the time to do this one of the reasons, again, we built this is that we were seeing waves of companies coming in and they just hadn't built in enough time to adapt their content, adapt their founder pitch. Um, Sometimes it's even changing how the images they were using lands to reflect the feel or the priorities of those key groups that they need to really bring on board and have engaged in their story. If we want to move to the next one. Thank you. So the solution here is identify the audiences and stakeholders that you need to engage and influence, and then get the data, spend the time to really understand who they are, what's changed, what they value, and how you can help. And just one more note on this, it's really worth doing a pretty significant mapping on this front. When we work with early stage startups coming in, one of the things we find, and I'll touch on this a bit later, is if you put in that front end time to really figure out who are those people, who are the organic groups, who are the Discord groups out here that are on your issue or topic, as much mapping as you can get, then you're really able to sort of tactically hit and activate all of those groups to amplify your brand story, and seem buzzier and bigger or whatever it is you need to unlock that growth. It really comes down to having these audiences and knowing who to be able to activate to be able to do that. If we can move to the next one. Super. So this is my favorite part on shaping your stories. And this is really where the bulk of my focus in all my communications work that I've done in the past and at the agency is really about, which is how do you tell an elevated story? You don't want to tell a product story. You really want to come in and tell an elevated purpose story. So the best way to think about this is, what is the highest impact that your product or solution can have? And why does it matter to the landscape, to the community, to the industry? Getting this why story right is really important in terms of both where the landscape is at the moment in terms of talent, but it's also how your brand and your business, regardless of size and stage, can be a part of a larger and bigger conversation. And so I have some examples in the deck, but I'll use the Lambda example. So Lambda School, which some of you may be familiar with now, Bloomtech, is an online coding school. They use income share agreements where you don't pay any tuition up front, you pay only when you get a job after. And so when I came in there, it was just after their Series B. They were looking to reposition themselves from online coding school to something bigger and more. They wanted to tell an elevated story that would help them unlock the next level of value for their Series C. And so what became the natural one to get Austin, their founder, connected to was the incredible debt struggle that people in the US are having, where, like education debt is overwhelming. How could we take income share agreements, which remain an unregulated and new financial instrument, and really position it as a human solution to tackling an overwhelming issue? And so that's just a really quick example of what you're looking to do with your elevated story, because by doing that, you're able to join much bigger tables than might otherwise be available, but also you kind of jump into an existing stream and conversation that's happening. So instead of having to be over here trying to get people interested in what your product does, you can go over there and be a part of a conversation that's already happening and join that stream and rise up with it. So definitely something to start to think about is how to tell that story authentically, what you can put in, and what is the kind of issue that you'd want to carry through and continue to be about as you grow. And I'm happy to take any kind of questions on that, because that's a really fun thing to also look at is, yeah, the product story is only going to get, at best, one or two pieces. The bigger purpose story and the policy story or the larger impact story is really where you have an opportunity to run an ongoing conversation. And that's something for most startups, coming into the market that remains a challenge, which is that you might get a couple of stories coming in, but how do you keep up a drumbeat and a cadence of hits and wins and content pieces that allow you to continue to be pertinent and grow? And so I think the other kind of big takeaway, along with make the time to get to know the US market and really understand what they're looking for, is really look at telling your elevated and bigger purpose story and trying to wrap your comms around that so you can be a part of bigger conversations. Super. Can we move to the next one, Erin? Thank you. And then we can jump through. So build your communities. And this is a spin-off a bit on doing the mapping and really identifying who the right stakeholders are. Community really is your accelerator, in that if you can get comms and messaging for each of these groups as you come in, as you look to do new announcements, these are the groups that can really take your story and just ramp it up. And the other interesting thing about effective community management like this, and just to run through, so communities as we see it are, they're your supporters, they're your customers, they're investors, they're potential partners or partners. They're all levels of government bodies that might be looking to drive business investment. They're accelerators, and then they're the influencers and validators, and media falls into that. So what we've seen that's really interesting, and a bit of a reverse on what would have been the case even 5 to 7 years ago, is that previously you could come in and a good couple media stories would open doors in communities. And now we're seeing a bit of the reverse, where a lot of media that startups and tech companies coming in are interested in, they're getting their story ideas from what's happening on social, what's happening on Substack, what's happening in interesting groups. And so there's been this sort of reversal where if you get good engagement in the right kind of community, it spills over into media in a way that previously that worked the other way. So the business case for investing in really tactical and strategic community outreach and management is really there. And often this is still an internal challenge because people want to see the deliverable and the return on investment that's an outside media article. And it's time to kind of push the message a bit for marketing teams and for founders to understand that sometimes the highest impact work that your comms team is going to do is in getting those right 5 to 7 emails out to activate or interest like a key community member, a key accelerator on an event, just getting that story so it really works for those people. And just a kind of last point on this, that's a really great one for early stage companies to be hyper aware of, is really spend the time, and this goes to what we said earlier about getting the right story for your community, but think about how your ideal validator would talk about your company if you weren't there, and how you can make it easier for them to do that. And this is where I say sometimes the most powerful business move that your comms teams will do is getting the email where that VC is able to take the right story that you want into the hallway to his next conversation. And so how can you tee that up to really help each of your communities tell the right story? And that's also your early stage employees, it's your friends and family, it's ideally everyone in your community that you can is telling the right story for what you need. And so the takeaway here is really give your team the time and invest the kind of work to get your communities and the messaging they need down, because when you then come out with your funding announcement and you want it to have a buzz and be relevant, these are the groups that you can tap to do so, and that can help drive it. And going back to what I said about how we built this organically, this was something that we really saw people hadn't taken the time to invest in those communities in advance. And it was a real, just kind of a waste, because it's hard to catch it up. But if you've done the work, and there's so many communities out here that want to help startups do well, from the C100 to there's just all kinds of groups of people that you can come in for different ways and tell your story, and then they're there for you and kind of on your team as you go forward. And if you're a new brand coming out into this crowded market, it's that community difference that can really, really make the difference to how the company does. If we want to jump to the next one. And then step 5 is choose your channels. If we want to move into this is speaking to what I said earlier about one of the biggest challenges for new brands coming in and early stage startups in the US market is just being able to drive a continuous story out there. And so to do that, it's really about investing in the channels that you can control. And so this is everything from your digital campaigns, your social media channels, your SEO optimization, targeted industry press, advisory councils, analysts and influencers. It's worth really investing in a series of channels that reflect your sector, your natural interest as a brand, but having those channels that you can continue to just keep driving your conversations and stories without being fully reliant on media. So media is one great channel. It's one great validator, but increasingly in your comms stack of channels, it's probably going to be a bit lower than most startups think, because you can't control it. It's just not what it used to be. And the way journalism is running, it's much, much better to build out your own channel products that let you communicate directly to your influencers. And so you can keep that story going on your terms throughout and add in media at different inflection points, or sponsored or digital ads, whatever you need to just bump it up, but you're not reliant on it. If we want to move to the next one. So one quick case study that really brings this all together is, I can never say their name right, I'm sorry, Bequam. It's a comp management software company that was founded in Switzerland. And they're a really great example of how to bring these different 5 steps in together. So they were looking to come into the US in, again, a very crowded market for the software they sell. What they did instead of just telling their product story is they really focused their resources on the adjacent kind of space, where they said, we're going to talk about gender equity, the need for transparency in pay rates, and how our software can be a part of that. But the software solution was the backstory. The real story was, how can transparent data make a difference on gender pay equity? And so it's just a great example of bringing together what we talked about. So instead of a product story, they joined an existing business and public conversation. As a new company coming in, they wouldn't have had much success starting their own conversation, but by coming into something that was already a hot and ongoing public and business conversation, they were able to elevate their brand and, take a seat at a table that they wouldn't have been able to do otherwise if they were trying to just start a conversation on their own. They also brought something helpful to the table. So they brought some new data in that they were able to take around to be a part of this conversation. They really identified all the communities and stakeholders that were interested in this issue of data transparency and gender equity. And in the background, we really engaged in sort of a one-to-one channel conversations with these different groups that were caring about this issue. And what this meant also was that they were able to get partnerships and validators very different than if they just come in as a management software company. Because by coming in around gender pay and transparency, we were able to go to think tanks, to research and universities, to a variety of C-suite groups that were coming together around this. And so we just gave them entry. And that would be one of the things I would really love to help the group with and share, is look for that issue where if you can join that conversation, suddenly your product and your solution and your team are in a whole new kind of community and ecosystem that if you were just coming in with the product or solution story wouldn't be possible for you. And sometimes this can take a bit of creativity, and it can be quite difficult because it may be an adjacent issue. It's not necessarily directly related to what you do, but have a look at what's happening and what your community and who your customers and buyers, what they care about that's a bit bigger and that media cares about, and that if you joined that group and that discussion, it would just really accelerate your brand recognition and the tables you were able to engage. I think that is the last. I think there's one more slide. So just as a final wrap up, it's really about making the most of your moment. It's a huge moment to think about coming into the US. It represents a really exciting time internally for your business. And I guess the big takeaway is really to, as you're building that launch roadmap, the ideal is start to think about it if you can, 8 to 12 months ahead of time in terms of what's the story that you need for the US market? What kind of research or conversations might you want to do in advance? Who are those communities that you can start to map and engage with and reach out to in the course of these months that are all there and want to help? But too often they get, if you just don't give them enough runway, we can't make the most of them. Look for that bigger purpose story that you can tell what's happening in that market, in that ecosystem that you think you can authentically, incredibly be a part of, and that fits the brand that you're building and that the team wants to be a part of. That's when it's usually the most effective, is when it is something that everybody cares about and you can be a part of that bigger conversation. And by doing so, a lot of your communities will just surface more readily. You'll see how they fit in, and you'll have something for your channels. It's hard to run an ongoing product story with the kind of momentum that most companies want as they're growing and reaching out. But if you have that purpose and elevated story, there's just a lot more communications opportunities. You'll get a lot more engagement. And so it becomes much easier to have a steady cadence and to give that sense of continual engagement from your brand and company. And I think this will probably get sent out with my speaker details. But if you'd like to download the full playbook, it's free. You just have to drop your email in, and it breaks down and has a few more case studies in there and a few more tips and some of the quotes and research in a bit more detail if you're interested in what those VCs and accelerators had to say. Perfect. I think that leaves us about 20 minutes for any questions or case studies that I might be able to jump in and help on, or anything that I can expand on from what I said.
That's great, Rita. Thank you so much. That's been super insightful. And I know entering the US market is top of mind for a lot of our founders and definitely a challenge. So this will be super helpful. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. We do have some that have already come through, so that's great. We're going to start off with Nirupama. So she says, or they say, I'm a copywriter working for Vedix, a customized hair care brand from India, recently launched in the US. What are the growth accelerators to crack the market online other than sales funnels?
So can you just repeat it? What are the growth accelerators?
To crack the market online other than sales funnels.
That's an interesting one. I think this is a good one for figuring out what an interesting conversation on this could be. Like maybe it's hard to give a set answer in terms of here's the answer, but I can give you the framework on probably how to approach it, which would be look at influencers and adjacent conversations on wellness, on global and like ethnic hair care. I've done some work with Ayurvedic brands coming in, and beyond the wellness conversation, there's a lot of other interesting conversations we were able to get that founder to be a part of in terms of why she created those products. And this is another one to maybe look at, is the why story and your founder why story, your product why story often in stepping back and looking at how to maybe tell a bigger story on that, new groups, influencers, and validators might surface. So not sure if that's a direct answer, but that would be my framework probably on how to have that team approach it. Would be have a look as well at adjacent brands that you think are engaging in interesting conversations beyond the sales funnel, and see if there's anything there for your team that you might be able to either emulate or piggyback on. Because there's usually, that's one thing we do internally a lot, is look at powerful brands that are driving adjacent conversations and see what there might be there, and who are the ones doing so. Like, who are they engaging with, from beauty influencers to beyond the obvious? Like, is there something to how the product is made that there's, I don't know, like an angle there on sustainability? Or so it's actually kind of worth maybe going back through your own product story and seeing if there's other angles that might become the accelerator point. So hopefully that's a little helpful.
Yeah. We have another one here from Jonathan. So they say, I'm an inventor of cargenerator.com, a device to let you use your car as a backup generator for home or camping. Dragon's Den winner of 100K, October 2018. Congrats. And they're wondering, how do they tell an elevated story?
Oh, that's really cool. I mean, there's all kinds of things pop up with that, including like dark ones on prepping, because I was looking at that before. But I think there's a really neat, like, that's a really cool consumer story to look at. I think this is one where you need to think about where you want to take it, because the best elevated stories, and this is one where you could take in a number of different ways, is one that feels right for your team and the brand overall. Like, is it more an outdoors angle? Is it more sustainability angle? Is it convenience? I don't know enough about the story to give that answer, or the market or landscape, but I think it's probably about figuring out which story is organic to the team and the founder there, in terms of what you want to talk about and what seems like the one that will grab, like, who the current customers are, who are you selling to, and what do they care about that could be a more elevated story. Like, is it a convenience story? Is it getting more for your money? I'm not sure what it is, but I think there's all kinds of ways that could probably go. Is it something to do with like a post-COVID new normal? The interesting thing often with elevated stories is that it's worth spending the time doing the full brainstorm, because it's not usually your first couple that you think. You don't want to do the obvious story. And so I think my suggestion there would be, without knowing a bit more about your team and brand, sounds like the makings of a number of cool stories. You must have told a great story to win Dragon's Den. You've got this amazing product. How is it being used currently? What is the highest impact point that you're seeing your customers get from doing it? And then what is the right conversation that you and the team want to do over the next couple of years as the elevated story?
We have another one here from Caroline. So they were at our table at the beginning. So they are a community manager at We Distill, a mobile platform that provides a safe space for young people to create communities. I'm trying to grow an engaging community and having a tough time really engaging.
So engaging with, this could be a neat one in terms of drivers for it. Maybe instead of focusing right on the end user, this is one to get educators, parents, and that space aware of what you're offering, like a safe space for them to connect. And maybe those are the points and connections that could be the places to start to build those communities. Could be, that what comes to mind immediately on that is that the accelerators could be parents and parent groups. And the neat thing about that is that these are really well mapped and self-organized communities, that if you can get your product and solution into a pain point that, as a parent of 3, I know all parents have, there could be some real acceleration there. Similarly with schools, especially, and camps and things that the public school system is amazing, but it can be tricky to break in there. but you can have a lot of traction very nimbly with private schools, independent schools, camps. I would look at maybe those groups as the way to your end user and a way to get the brand as a solution really out there to people who are actively looking for this. That's an exciting.
All right, we have another one here from Mauricio. After the downfall of companies like Theranos and WeWork, and the high exposure given to these business cases recently by streaming TV, do you believe the US market has become more skeptical to PR?
I do definitely think that there is an element to that. Yeah, like it's gone are the days for sure where just a great story can do it. And that said, they are and they're not, right? Like it's still a story. And I would put Lambda School and Bloomtech in there where there was a lot of hurdles in terms of the business, but they continue to tell a great story with a founder. Austin's got a huge Twitter profile. And so I think there's a grain of salt, but overall, marketing still kind of wins in the US. And that hasn't changed. And we can see that in other industries just around and the numbers coming in still. So I would say there's definitely a grain of salt to it. But overall, and I think there's something interesting, like PR, it's still like there's a skepticism on media writ large. There is a skepticism a bit more in terms of, the founder with the mind-blowing story, and yet that's still what everyone looks for. So I don't know how much it's changed. I'd say it's a little bit, but overall, I think the founder with an amazing story is still going to stand out, and that's still going to be what people gravitate to, including media and investors.
Do you have any tips for companies of how to really gain that trust, to decrease that level of skepticism?
Yeah, I think one of the best ways to do that, there's a threefold thing to it, which is one, and I think for most Canadian founders and companies, the risk is it's just not culturally the way. I mean, it sounds like a stereotype, and yet I can tell you in boardrooms, we're regularly coaching founders coming in to the style is different. We're a little more low key. So I would say for most Canadian founders, we're usually asking them to dial it up a bit. But tactically, the other way around this is have your team tell your story. And this is a really interesting one where, especially with early stage, and since the focus is on the founding team so much, it gets a little lost. But employees and early stage employees are one of your best story ambassadors. So creating content or platforms or means that they can share why they believe in what you're doing, why they're coming for the elevated story, why they believe in whatever it is that brought them there. That can be one really incredible and authentic way to get that story, an elevated story out there, is that don't just have the founder tell it, have a larger portion of the team earlier on in the stages be a part of telling their story and sharing their, and help them out by making it easier. One of the things I do notice, and I advise a lot of early stage startups just on the side as well, is that that piece is often kind of lost. Like you'll find that the early stage team, everybody's telling a bit of a different story. And so even getting everyone tightly coalesced around how they tell it in their own words, but most effectively, that can be one of the best ways to tell your story, and then make it easy for them, whether it's on Twitter or wherever your communities are. Just enable them however you can, because they're smart, to be able to tell their story, because that does land well. And the other group to really invest time much earlier than most companies do would be your end user. So I'll go back to the Lambda School example because it's an easy one. So that's a business where there's the prospective students, there's the final students, and then there's the partners that we partnered with who actually give those students a job. And so one thing that we did as soon as I came in is that we set up ways for students to tell like why they were coming there, what their stories were. And those became a really powerful accelerator, because it's really cool to hear real people say why they were coming to Lambda School. And so my advice on that would be the way to get those stories out there would be to look at much earlier than you might have thought how your team and your end user can help tell that story for you. Take some of the pressure off just the founder.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea and has a lot of value when it's more than just one person delivering the message. We have one more here from Claire. So they say, thank you for presenting, Riva. I'm a college student creating a business that's for certified life cycle sustainable bio packaging. Beyond the obvious sustainable moral reasons, how can I sell to CPGs?
Beyond the moral, yeah, it's an interesting one. How can we sell? I mean, the obvious ones are good ones in terms of joining those conversations and getting, I mean, in terms of getting out there, this would be one that I would say really look for early awards and anything like that that brings you a bit more into different rooms. I think there's a lot you can do on this one in terms of joining existing sustainability conversations, say on Twitter or in other places online, and telling your story in terms of the story happening there. These are really great tactics for early stage companies when you don't have the time and, well, you don't have the money or team to probably help do it. But if you can, you know, just 2 to 3 times a week, find your channels and see the conversations that are happening there. Where are your buyers naturally going? What are they paying attention to? What are their teams paying attention to? Some of it will be the obvious, but if you can get in there and piggyback on the obvious, it's often an easier accelerator, especially on something like this where there's so much happening that it's almost about how do you just tactically map who are the groups that have the highest probably turnaround acceleration for you, and how can you on public open channels just start to chime in with what you're doing. Questions can be great for this. Asking for, I don't know what your bandwidth is like, but we recently worked with a sustainability packaging company where they created some really interesting content and creative online to get people rallying around. I think that would be my suggestion. Is there's so much happening here. This is really one for mapping where you think the points, the customers and people you really need to reach, where are they already going? How can you go there and join that conversation? And then just really put in the time to stand out by showing up again and again. And that's another kind of piece for early stage in the US market. One of the things we say is like having those channels that just let you show up more and have that visibility across your ecosystems and key communities. That should be a key piece of the comm strategy. Is how are you going to be able to control and be a part of conversations you want? Is it about creating a content thing where your founder interviews people from target groups so you can join their community and give them a reason to talk to you? Like thinking a little bit about kind of tactics and products that you might have associated with later stage companies. But if you were to do it a bit earlier, it doesn't take a lot of money. It does take some time, but you'll have a huge payoff on the other side, and you'll have a reason to have people talk to you, which can be great coming into a new market, because then you can go around to your communities. And you're not just asking for investors or partnerships, you're also bringing something interesting to the table in terms of what you might be able to do for a profile or getting investors to share their ideas. People really do love doing that, and it remains a really great SEO strategy for early stage companies.
Great, and I see Claire put in the chat there that was helpful, so thank you. In the last 3 minutes, we had one final question come in from Peter asking about your services. So can you talk about your client engagement models, needs assessment, service design, onboarding, business model, ongoing services versus short consulting based?
Yeah, I mean, so Shift Communications is a full service company. We're increasingly moving to creating a parachute model because we're finding a lot of our early stage companies, you don't necessarily need a full year, but you do need some who knows your business and can jump in at key points. And so if you are looking for something, please feel free to reach out. We are doing a pretty tailored model for early stage companies because the needs vary so much depending on what's the in-house capabilities, what's the sector. So it's hard to give, like a set pat answer on it, but very flexible in terms of how we approach this. We work a lot with early stage companies coming in, everything from helping the founder get their pitch deck, get their story right, to the full, how do you make your funding announcement about something more than the numbers and get that elevated story and make it so your funding announcement's not the lead, it's just a proof point to how incredible the product or solution that you're doing is. So we do the full range from that to continuing on in terms of building the channels, the content, the SEO. So if you are looking for a more deeper answer, just drop me an email and I'd be happy to connect.
Yeah, thank you so much for everyone for joining us and for Riva for sharing your expertise. I know it's helped a lot of people here today just working through specific challenges that they're having. I see in the Q&A someone did ask if you're sharing your email. We will be sending a follow-up email out after the event, so you'll probably get that tomorrow. So you can connect with Riva that way if you do want to connect with her and get her brain working on your specific challenges. So with that, we'll close out our session for today and just keep an eye out on your newsletters to see our upcoming events. Thanks so much, everyone.
Sharon, thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks for coming.